So tonight, 10 years later, just a little background maybe. I was invited in 2002 by Cathy Kelly, one of the co-founders of Voices in the Wilderness, to think about being part of a sub-project of Voices in the Wilderness called the Iraq Peace Team, to go to Iraq and, in the event of an invasion, to stay on if it was possible and walk alongside of ordinary Iraqis. The idea being, my children are their children are my children, that no one life is more valuable than another. So I ended up going in, I think it was September of 2002, and then staying on the next months up until shock and awe and through shock and awe. And a couple months after the regime collapsed, Cathy Kelly and I returned to the States. And then some of us went back. About 8 months into the occupation, for 3 months I went, and we rented an apartment. But in January of 2004, I might say that in that time, in the fall, in the winter of 2003, the UN complex had already been bombed, and the kidnappings were starting, and snipers on the roof. And so in January 2004, we made the decision as Voices in the Wilderness not to go, that we couldn't go to Iraq, Central or Southern anymore, because we would put Iraqis in danger by their mere association with us. I tell you all that because this trip in October, November of 2013 was the first time that we've ventured back to Iraq. And so it was really, in many ways, a dream come true for me. And I've been the principal person following Iraq in these last years because of the situation in Afghanistan and the drone activity. Voices has been giving more attention to Afghanistan and taking delegations to Afghanistan. So one last thing is that for the last 7 years or so, I've been going to Jordan and Syria for longer periods of time, sometimes 3-month periods, 6-month periods, to be alongside of Iraqi refugees who have fled the violence of their country. And now, also on this trip, I had the hope of seeing some Iraqi families that we knew in Syria as refugees who have had to come back to Iraq because of the violence now in Syria. So you will also see some of these pictures. So I'm just going to take you on this journey with me. And what I want, though, is that Iraqis will tell you what it's like for them 10 years later. So I'll actually... I don't like to read when I'm speaking, but I will be quoting Iraqis, just so you know, okay? So I went through Istanbul this time on Turkish Airlines and landed in Najaf, which has an airstrip, because it's not easy to get, as a US citizen, a visa to Baghdad. But we had connections in Najaf. So I got to the airport and was advised that the governor of the province of Najaf was inviting me to stay for 3 days at the governor's guest house. And this was the view, this is the Euphrates River from my window. I stayed for 3 days at the guest house. The guest house turned out to be one of the previous palaces of Saddam Hussein, and I was the only person in it. So here I am, just sort of making a joke in a way. In the airport, it was a very special trip in many ways, but I stayed quite a bit in Najaf. Najaf and Karbala are two fully Shia areas, and they have the holiest shrines in all of Shia Islam. And so they get many pilgrims, and I've had heard so many stories. And their holy shrines are in both of those places. And so when I was in the airport, they suggested that I put, the head covering on, because all of the women in Najaf and in Karbala wear headscarf. And I did this out of respect, and also because you don't want to draw attention to the family that you're staying with or the people that you're with. So after 3 days, I moved into, another neighborhood with my host family, which this is the view from that window. And I felt much more comfortable here. I'm sorry it's a little dark, but this is like the neighborhood area, walking around. So this is the elementary school, which is just a block or a block and a half from the house where I stayed. And it's just very sweet, the kids. So as I said, Najaf and Karbala, which are about 2 hours, 2.5 hours southwest of Baghdad, are the two holiest places for Shia Muslims. And they get many pilgrims from Iran as well. And there are the sacred shrines of their martyrs, Imam Ali and Imam Hussein. And I think it's safe to say that it would be Shia Muslims' wish to be buried in this cemetery in Najaf, any Shia in the world. And this is the largest cemetery in the world. And there was one family that I knew from Syria who are now back in Baghdad. I couldn't visit them in Baghdad. It was too dangerous in the area where they lived. So they came to me by bus to Najaf, and we went to the cemetery because the mother, the wife, her brother had died a year before, and she wanted to pray at the grave. So there she is. I think you might find it interesting. These pilgrimages, this is not my picture, but I like it because I saw many pilgrims on the road from Najaf. Walking is very important to the holy shrine of Karbala. It's about an hour by car, so it's quite a distance to walk. These pilgrimages were not allowed under Saddam Hussein. So when the regime fell on the 20th of April 2003, only days later was the 40th commemoration of the death of Imam Hussein. And approximately 4 million pilgrims traveled to Karbala. And I remember the excitement of the young Muslims in Baghdad who were able to take part in this feast, you know. And now they have pilgrims year-round who come there. But now on those 10 special days of Ashura, there are 12 to 14 million people who come to Karbala, just to give you an idea. And everybody opens their house. This is also not my picture. But the family that I stayed with in Karbala, they lent me these pictures. And here's someone calling, come and eat. And I wrote a piece about this, a lesson in hospitality. And there's big vats of rice and lamb meat, and everybody opens their house in Karbala, and people sleep, and they bring the washing machines out front, and they buy T-shirts and socks, and they have first aid stations, and it's just really a beautiful thing. And this was the family that I stayed with in Karbala. And I've heard many stories from this gentleman in Amman about Karbala, and he told me that there's a story about Imam Hussein. Before he and 72 members of his family and clan were slaughtered, Imam Hussein was seen crying. And he said, somebody asked him, why are you crying? He said, I know I'm going to be killed, but I'm crying for those who will kill me, who will go to hell. They don't know what they're doing. And so this father and dear friend and husband said to me, I understand something about Jesus and his forgiving others. And this is our friend teaches high school and calligraphy and graphic arts, and he's showing some of his students' work. He had to flee because he was involved in human rights. He had to flee in 2006, and he went first to Egypt and then to Syria, was joined by his family, but he's back now and not working any longer in human rights. But it was a great pleasure to meet his family. I want to say a couple things about when I was in Karbala. I had a visit from several people, many people, and one young man, a high school teacher in a village school, was telling me how the situation is in Iraq, and he said, the situation is very bad in Iraq. The politicians are corrupt in the whole country. They are looking for their own interest. The regime didn't serve the people, now the government doesn't either. I see no hope for Iraq, he said. The boys don't want to learn. They have been affected by the war. They have seen blood and killing. They've turned into beasts and are violent with no principles, no respect. And then the oldest son of this gentleman is in his third year at the University of Karbala. He's 23, and I fell in love with him. He speaks beautiful English, and he just has a beautiful heart. And he said to me that his hobby was writing poetry. He likes Shakespeare, because Shakespeare gives the world advice, to be or not to be. And his father asked him, "Why are you always writing poetry?" And he said, "I must," he told me, "I cannot stop. When I write, I fly." He also told me that the war is not over. It continues until now. He said, "The damage of the war is like Hiroshima. Our babies are deformed. We have many in Karbala. Many have left their homes to go to another country. Kidnappings are still happening of small children, not only for money, but to make people afraid." So one evening I went to the home of a dear sheikh. This is a gentle, mild-mannered man, to speak about interfaith things and to just visit. And we were traveling the next day to the south, to Basra, and he learned that and decided spontaneously to come with us on the condition that we would allow him to buy us kebab at 6 a.m. at a roadside stand, which we did. So this is in the car. I had a chance through a translator to speak at length. It's about a 5-hour drive. We just whizzed through because we had this not a famous, but this honorable sheikh in the front, and all the checkpoints just let us go right through. Anyway, in the car we continued our conversation, and I asked him what he felt the effects of the violence has been on Iraqis. And he responded that the Iraqi people were living peacefully, different groups together side by side until the Iraq-Iran war. The wealthy and poor alike were sent to the front to fight. This was the outbreak of violence, he said. And then he said, "We consider the American people, represented by the soldiers who fight the war against us, as war criminals. We saw how they were cruel and savage, how their tanks ran over innocent people. It became normal for every household to lose loved ones. We saw terrorists whom we caught and handed over to the US troops, later released. Many wrongdoings are credited to Islam. The US was wrong to bring terror to Iraq. The Iraqi people are religious, and they will become strong and resilient again." So, hospitality has to do with food, and has to do with food preparation and celebration, and you must stay and eat, and all the stops are pulled out. They might eat rice and beans, but when a guest comes, this is a fish dinner, and all the rice and salad and yogurt, and this is another. I just had to show you these pictures because it's very much a part of Middle Eastern culture. Okay, I want to talk about water. I happen to be a nurse by profession. And when I lived in Baghdad 10 years ago or whatever, we drank tap water. We could drink water out of the tap. There's no potable water now in Iraq. This is, as I said, the Euphrates, and this comes from Syria, and it feeds like Karbala and Najaf, and it's very contaminated. So you either buy water, which is expensive in plastic bottles, or you have to have a filter system where you have to buy the filters. And it's a little sophisticated. This is the house where I lived. This is the kitchen. And so we had this water system. This is the sun setting over the Tigris in Baghdad. I took this picture. This is not quite as contaminated. Here you can use this kind of filter where you can take out the charcoal thing and wash it manually, you know. This costs about $120, so it's not affordable to everybody. This is in one of the hospitals in Najaf, and I was in a ward with 6 children, and 3 of them were there with gastrointestinal problems. And we went around and asked the parents or the mother, whoever was there, what kind of water where they got their water. And the other children, 2 of them were there with respiratory ailments because the increase in asthma has gone up. This is a delegation that came from the Twin Cities, from Minneapolis while I was there. And they have supplied 80 schools in Najaf with water filter systems. And this is one of the schools. The school where you saw the little kids waving. She's helping herself to a glass of water. Pollution, air pollution. I had to shut the window of the room where I was staying, not only in Najaf but also in Baghdad, because the air was so toxic that I couldn't sleep with the window open. And I just took these pictures on the road These pictures that you see of Baghdad were all taken surreptitiously through the window of a moving car. Just to give you some idea. Okay, this is the electrical grid. This is the wires that go to a generator. You know, there's no national electrical grid. The electricity kept going down. And you can imagine people pay, to give you a ballpark figure, you would pay maybe $10 a month for the national electrical grid, which keeps shutting down. When that shuts down, if you're hooked up to like a local generator, you might get electricity. You pay $50 a month for that, to that boss. But you can imagine the accidents that happen, and this is throughout the country. This is 10 years after the war. I just took some of these pictures to give you an idea. And there are accidents, you know, people die from these wires. Okay, we're going to go to Baghdad now. If I had 3 words to talk about Baghdad, and I heard all these stories, but to see it is another thing. Checkpoints, traffic jams, and concrete barricades. Okay, so this is a traffic jam. You can see new cars. I want you to note that there are new cars, and you see the electrical wires. This is the University of Mustansiriya, which now has a barricade, well, for some years now. This is Baghdad. I just want you to get a sense of what you see in Baghdad. That's Al-Qarada. This is Baghdad. Again, this is the green zone is behind that. And the US Embassy employs 16,000 people. It's the biggest embassy. And the Iraqis say, what are they doing there? This is a picture of hope, and I'm so proud of this picture because it was taken in a moving car. This is a flatbed truck with 2 concrete barricades, and there's a guy standing up there, and they're going to be taken to a concrete barricade cemetery. So for me, that's like a sign of hope. These are 2 of my heroes who never left the children. They're pediatric oncologists. And we have been able to maintain contact with them, and I saw them in Amman in 2006 before the borders were closed to Iraqis to come to Amman, and so I got to visit them, and they took me through the ward, and I saw the children. They can have up to 90 children in the ward. I didn't take any pictures. It was too intrusive. The kids are so sick, bald, weak, crying, dying, and their moms. But they teach residents, and they have a great team. And when they told the residents in 2008 that they really thought they had to leave because of the assassinations on doctors and the professional class, the residents said to them, if you leave, we leave, because you're the reason we're staying. So they never left. And they insisted on taking me out to get some kebab. So we went to this little restaurant on the Tigris after work, and they have these little boats that come up and you get in, and they were so relaxed. It was just a lovely afternoon. I just want to tell you what some people were telling me. We were stuck in a traffic jam, cars in front, cars behind. It gave us time to visit, and someone said, security is better. They have to leave their homes at 6 a.m. to get to work because of the roadblocks and traffic jams. They have to search the cars for bombs. That's what takes so long, and you might have 3 checkpoints in the space of a block. And you can sit at a checkpoint for an hour. Now, in the summer, when it's 120 degrees and 130 inside the car, that's really hard. But security is better. Violence is more targeted now and not as random. There are more cars and salaries are better. Outwardly, things look better, but they are at a very low point. They have been working for such a long time, and they see no hope. There was no hope under Saddam, they said, and there is no hope now. It is different. We can talk. We can even go on television and denounce or say something against the vice president, and nothing will happen, but nothing will change. The whole country is rife with corruption. You can buy your education. You can buy a post in a job. Everything is up for grabs. Iraq is the biggest country in the world in bribes. So people feel powerless to change. The doctors go to an international conference and people say to them, Iraq used to be at the top of the list of the countries in the Middle East in terms of scientific advancement. What is going on? They ask them. This is a beautiful area in Baghdad where we were visiting a family that came back from Syria and was renting a little room in the souks, in the market aisles. This is my translator. And this is a lovely woman, a 23-year-old who graduated from university in English. So she was about 13 when the U.S. war in Iraq broke out. And I asked her how she feels the war has affected her country. And this is what she said. People have changed. They think of themselves. It's not good. Things have gotten worse. Children 8 and 10 years old think of weapons and killing. They do not have the thoughts of children. I would be afraid for my own children growing up in this atmosphere. I have never felt safe since the war. We've forgotten the real meaning of safety. I hope it doesn't get worse because it is my country. I hope for all the good for it. She wants to be a teacher. She says the mass exodus of the professional class has had a big effect on her generation. I'm afraid, she said, the level of education is very low, even in the colleges. The good teachers have left the country. But she wants to teach the new generation in the right way, not as her teachers taught her. I want, she said, to do good, to positively affect society. I have hope for the future, and I wish the goodness in people becomes greater than the evil. Iraqi people are very kind, but after the war, many changes happened in the psyche. She hopes to get a job, have a good family, and good circumstances. And what would these be, I asked, the good circumstances? Safety, of course, she said. And then the behavior of people will change. It will become better. And by improving basic services, the government should fix the electrical system, the water system, the roads, make jobs for those who graduate. There is corruption inside of every ministry, she said. Change has to come from inside the government itself. This is one of the families that came back from Syria. They were hoping to get resettled to the United States, but their neighborhood became very dangerous in Damascus, where they were living. They had to flee. They were kidnapping children and break-ins and thefts, so they're back in Baghdad. I don't want to take too much of your time because I know we have other things to do here tonight, but this little one is in the 6th grade now. I've known these kids, and I knew them before they had this baby boy. And so I said, how's school going? And she said, not good. A couple of days ago, there was a big explosion, and the teacher ran out and locked the door. And so the kids hid under the desks, and then they started banging on the door to get out. And they couldn't, and they found a window high up where they were able to crawl out, and she sort of proudly showed me the bruises on her arms, you know. But the parents said, now, can we go to the U.S.? Can you get us? Can you help us go to the U.S.? And I was trying to explain how the recession has hit us, and they don't speak English. And they said, well, we're going to stay here where there's explosions, where our kids can be killed, you know. So this is another family that I know quite well, who were accepted for resettlement to the U.S. And they could have traveled, but the mother had too many of her family members killed by U.S. soldiers, and she just couldn't psychologically, emotionally bring herself to travel to the U.S. So they are back. They had to come back because of the violence in Syria. This is the hotel that we stayed in during shock and awe. It's empty now. I just took this picture. It's the Alfanar. And then a miracle of miracles, we found the Dominican sisters. This was a miracle. And they knew, they're still there, although most all the Christians have fled Baghdad. They still run the school, and I asked if they had Christian children, and she said, we don't have Christian children, and we don't have Muslim children, we have Iraqi children. This is the principal, Sister Teresa. And they knew Sister Anne Montgomery, one of our great peacemakers who died recently. I don't know if you know Sister Anne Montgomery. So they hadn't heard of her death. And we laughed because I had the hijab on, right? It was with the veil. And this is my driver, and both my translator and my driver are Muslim, and they had never been in a church, but they love Mary, and he wanted his picture taken in front of the statue of Mary, who is often in the Quran mentioned. And he definitely wanted this picture. He's a very dear man. His child was kidnapped when he was 6 and has deep psychological problems. And this is Sister Marianne, San Rafael Hospital, a little hospital in Al-Qarada. She's still there, never left, despite all the violence that still goes on. And so they have a neonatal section now, and there she is. She gave us a little tour. And this is Ali. I took this picture when he was 18, right before the war. I loved this picture because he could be any 18-year-old in the world, and his mother was very worried that he wouldn't live through the war, and he did. And I saw him in 2008 in Amman. We had a wonderful visit. And 3 weeks later, when he went back, he was a bodyguard for Minister of Electricity, and when he went back to Baghdad, one of his friends turned him in on a false charge of being part of al-Sadr's militia, and he spent 3 years in prison and was in 4 different prisons and tortured in each one of them. And his mother had to pay $14,000 to get him out of prison, even though he was cleared by a judge. Here he is, he's 28, and he left a broken man from prison. And it was my great joy to be able to embrace him and see him. He's doing better, he's on the mend. This is Fallujah. Fallujah is called the city of mosques, and it's all Sunni, and its neighbor is Ramadi, so they're like sister cities. And I got to go there towards the end of my visit, and I sat in on a lecture in English of fifth-year university students. I was delighted to do that. And then the president of the college wanted me to speak as an honored guest after, and the professor even hurried up the PowerPoint, which was embarrassing. It was sort of awkward, and then I introduced myself and who I was, and that many people came with me on this trip, who were deeply grieved about the war, and and I saw the no potable water, no electricity, and then I said, but really, I'd like to hear from you, if I may. And there was dead silence. Nobody spoke. And then a young man in the front, closer to me than you are, said to me, we have nothing to say. The last years have only been sad ones. And then again there was silence, more silence. And then an impassioned young woman back in the lecture hall spoke up, and I knew it cost her to speak, you could tell. And she said, it's not about water and electricity. Because I had mentioned that, right? You have destroyed everything. You have destroyed our country. You have destroyed our ancient civilization. You have destroyed what's inside of us, she said, like this. You've taken our smiles from us. You've taken our dreams. And then people began to speak. Another said, Iraqis cannot forget what Americans have done. They destroyed the childhood. You don't destroy everything and then say we're sorry. You don't commit crimes and then say sorry. To bomb us, another said, and then send teams to investigate the effects of the bombs. No, it will not be forgotten. It is not written on our hearts, it's carved in our hearts. We are happy to make bridges between people, but we will not forget. What can you do? They said. They kept saying that. What can you do? In Fallujah, 30% of our babies are being born deformed. What can you do? Then another person, that same person, spoke of meeting an American soldier in the airport. He was part of the special forces in Iraq. The soldier told him, the Bible tells us not to kill, but we were taught to kill for nothing, just to kill. I'm so sorry. And then this man said, build bridges, apologize. And there was no rancor in his tone, just anger and deep pain. Then we visited the home of a sheikh, and we were visiting and talking to him about we had just come from that encounter, and in the course of our sharing, we spoke of our visit and what was said there, and he said sorrowfully, war always results in 2 losers. And now, to come to sort of a conclusion, the last image I had the night before I was to return on an early morning flight to Najaf, a woman doctor came to me. The woman on the right is an orthopedic doctor with a young boy, Mohammed, who's 14, and his father, and they wanted to see me. When Mohammed was 6 years old, he was walking home from school, and he stepped on an electrical wire of a telephone pole that was downed by a US bomb, and he lost both legs and both arms. And they wanted to know if I could help him get an arm, one simple prosthesis. When his father put the prosthesis on him, he stood and walked. And I said to him, Mohammed, I've never seen, you're one of the bravest boys I've ever seen. But there was something so broken in him. And so since I've been back, I've been trying with Shriners and other things to try to find a place, or even within Iraq or in Jordan maybe, to find a place that he could get a simple arm. Since he was 6 years old, he can't touch his nose, he can't embrace anybody, he can't do anything for himself. He has no arms and no legs. So now, I don't want to leave you with that image. And I'm just going to show you some beautiful faces to sort of finish up this time. His father was, in 2008, the US soldiers were going into homes to looking for guns. And it's sort of a rural area, as you've seen. And his sister called him. Everybody was sleeping. It was about 9:30. They go to bed early. And his sister across the way called and said, the US soldiers are coming into the homes. And he said, I'll be right over and see what it's about. And he went over. And that was his father's house who had died, a little poor house. And his 17-year-old brother was there. And his father had a automatic rifle in the house. And then somebody else had left their rifle there. There were 2 rifles. And they were arrested, the 17-year-old, and then his father and another brother. And the 17-year-old, they got 10 years. Under Bremer, there was a law passed, if guns are found in your house, you get 10 years. And so his father was freed eventually after 2 years and paying $3,000. Even though he was cleared by a judge, he had to pay the prison to get out. But his brother, who was 17, is now 21, is serving. He's served 4 of 10 years, and he's taken seizures now in the prison where he is. It was her 4th birthday. Isn't she cute? This is the niece of one of my translators who can't get to Baghdad. He's a refugee, and so I got to visit his family. And with that picture, we're going to end. I'll read one thing just in closing, and it's a quote that I've often used from C.S. Lewis from the preface of The Great Divorce. And he says in that preface, I do not think that all who choose wrong paths perish, but their rescue consists in being put back on the right road. A sum can be put right, but only by going back till you find the error and working it afresh from that point, never by simply going on. Evil can be undone, but it cannot develop into good. Time does not heal it. So thank you very much. This is a rare opportunity, actually, to hear from you all. Please.
As the students in Fallujah said, we can't just invade them and destroy them as well as their country and then say sorry. But what can we do as people, as a country?
Well, that's a good question. I have no answer. I mean, I don't know where it begins. I think we do have to go back to the point in the road where we took the wrong turn and acknowledge that now, how that happens. Because we just, without doing that, we just go to the next war, which we're doing. I mean, you hear the same. It's just horrifying when you listen about Iran and nuclear capabilities and chemical weapons in Syria. And I mean, it's just sort of like a replay, you know? So, I mean, I think their creative energy is here. And we have to find ways, but I don't have the answer. I have just a small part, you know, to keep those connections, or hopefully that Iraqis can come to words, you know, because we need to hear that, right? What are some of the things you were thinking? Yes?
You hear about Sunnis and Shiites. So in the beginning, were they compatible, and where do they stand now?
Well, you know, I've heard so many stories over the years, and I'm sure Bert and others have too, where Iraqis went to school together. They didn't even know who was Sunni, who was Shia, who was Christian. If you had a neighbor who was Christian, you went, and you were Muslim, you went to them with gifts at Christmas, and they came to you with gifts at Eid. They helped each other build their houses. In their workplaces, they did not ask who's Sunni, who's Shia, who's Christian, who's Kurdish. So, I mean, I have my own strong feelings about our taking our form of democracy over there and insisting that their parliamentary structure be so many percent Christian, so many percent Sunni, so many percent Shia. That, you know, I saw Iraqis like look at each other like, what? It's not how they think, it's not who they are. And yet we forced that on them, you know, and so I feel that had really far-reaching consequences. But I think a big thing is, and I'll say this again, and I have already said it, we allowed terrorism into that country. We disbanded the army, the police, the borders were open, and they descended on, I mean, I was there, we saw the license plates. We saw people descend on like a fallen animal and start eating the carcass. And then later the suicide bombs started and all this sectarian division and mistrust and horrible, horrible, unspeakable violence. And you know, this just, what can you say in the face of that?
Feel that create that in other countries, like the situation in Syria?
Well, I can tell you that Iraq and Jordan and people are very worried about Syria. The same thing's going to happen in Syria. You know, the same kind of sectarian division. It's already starting. You know, there are foreign elements in Syria. They have been from the beginning. It's just so hard to tell. I don't know. I don't pretend to know what the answers are. But I know Iraqis grieve about that. They remember how they lived side by side and how when they fled to a Christian fled to a Muslim's place. But I know so many Christians, even my wearing the hijab was something for me that was not easy. I could do it out of respect, but I've met so many Christian Iraqis in Syria and Jordan who have had to flee because of radical Islamic groups who said, if you don't put the hijab on, we'll kill you. And the family had to flee. And their principles would not allow them to put the hijab on, you know. And I said to this sheikh, I said, because we had this lovely rapport, and I said, you know, I'm happy to wear the hijab because out of respect. But if we're talking about opening the community, the city, to Christian, to Jewish, once again to other, it's not who I am. You know, and I told him I've known Christian Iraqis who have had to flee the country because of radical Islamic elements who said, you wear that or you're finished, you know. So people believe very deeply. They're willing to die for what they believe, Christian and Muslim alike, you know. In a good way. I'm not talking about fundamental Islam now.
How did he respond?
He listened, you know. Yeah. He listened. I mean, we listened to one another. I was just broaching it gently, you know.
And we still have Iraqi refugees in Jordan and other.
And Syria had the greatest number. And where do they go now? We hear about 1 million Syrian refugees who are registered with the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. 1 million in Jordan, in Turkey, in Lebanon, principally. They've fled. Those are Syrians. We hear nothing about Iraqis. And there could be 300,000, 500,000 in Syria. And Turkey doesn't want them, Lebanon doesn't want them, Jordan will not take them. So how do we smuggle them out? And once they get to Turkey, and I know Iraqi families who have fled to Turkey and to Lebanon, what do they do now? How do they live? How do they pay rent? Where do they go? So we don't hear that in the media. We don't hear that. And I just want to tell you one story that I found very upsetting. In Brooklyn, there's an Iraqi family that I know. The brother was a translator for me in Syria, and he came over here on the refugee program. And his sister works in a little kiosk, and she wears the hijab, and she waits on customers like at the cash register. And recently, somebody came in and accused her of buying stolen cell phones. And they arrested her and handcuffed her and pulled off the hijab. And when she went to the court, she had to stay overnight in the... It was so traumatic for her. She stayed overnight to see the judge the next morning, and he would not let her wear the hijab. He would not let her wear the veil. And I thought to myself, if that was a Catholic sister, who had a veil on, I mean, I don't know, things are upside down. Things are so twisted, So where do we begin to, address these issues? I don't know why I'm thinking and carrying on about that, but it affected me, yes.
I'm haunted by the question which was asked in our group, what can we do? And, not much, I guess, but we have this 15 minutes now of attention on Iraq, the place where the war is over, finished, we won, I think we won or something. So at least one small thing we could do is to use social media and other venues, letters to the editor, whatever, repeating some of what you've said, some of those really telling statements,
Right.
Including the one, don't say you're sorry and think it's over, but with the theme that it ain't over till it's over.
It isn't over.
And this is still going on.
2 days ago, over 100 people were killed in Iraq 2 days ago. Over 4,000 civilians were killed last year in 2012. I mean, we just don't get the news. And so there's explosions throughout the whole country, yeah.
And we could do our small part in being the news, and I don't know if there's some way to mimic what you did tonight, but for me, the horror stories, followed by just those pictures, what it might have been, what their lives might have been, looking at those pictures, mostly of the young people, to get that across, that these are still vibrant, horrible things that are going on.
Yes, please.
Explain to me in the judicial system that they have over there, how a judge can say you're free, but yet you still have to pay.
Well, they can be cleared by the judicial system, but the penal system, will not free them. I want to refer you to an article in The Independent, March 4th. And I have a copy in my suitcase, but it's like, if you Google March 4th, The Independent, it's like corruption in Iraq. That really gives a good explanation of the depth of and sort of why things are so difficult to turn around now because of the extent of the corruption. I can't do it, but if you want, I'll quickly look for that article and show it to you afterwards, okay? Please.
So are there some NGOs doing good work there that do some good work?
As far as I know, the NGOs are working out of the north in Kurdistan, which is a whole different animal. Kurdistan, Suleimania, Erbil, it's like its own independent region, and it has been since the war. And it's relatively safe, although they have skirmishes and bombings with the Turks, and they've had problems there. But that's where the NGOs are. They're not in Baghdad. It's not safe, really, to my knowledge, to be in Baghdad. Or in Jordan. They work out of Jordan, too. Yes?
Do you know or have any idea what the 16,000 odd Americans are doing who are living in the green zone? I mean, half of them are contractors.
No. They aren't contractors. They have 8,000 contractors to protect them.
In addition to
Yes. I mean, that is a question. See, I mean, that's a place to begin. I mean, that's one place you could begin, because Iraqis are asking that question. They'll say, they haven't gone home. There's 16,000. And every time I would write that, I'd Google it because I just couldn't believe it. So I'd Google it again. I thought I must be mistaken. It must be 1,600. No, it's 16,000.
Do you have any idea what they're doing?
No, I don't.
The Iraqis have any clue?
No.
They have any rumors of what they're doing?
It's not something they asked me. What are they doing? I don't know. I mean, maybe in another visit, and if we're able to have more visits with ministers, we can ask that question.
Well, we also have that huge embassy.
That's it. They employ 16,000, yes.
Zone became the
Yes.
embassy.
Yes, yes.
It's in the green zone.
Largest embassy in the world.
Yes.
Last night when I was watching, too late, on TV, two guys with the government, US government, were talking about how important and wonderful it would be to go to more war in more places, and which we all are feeling, I'm sure. But people speaking about how they've hired some new people that will go and shoot anybody and every living thing that they can see around, as long as it isn't a US soldier. And we've hired them. And that sounds exactly like what you're saying, that names of the group, and they find that they've been trying to get rid of them, and they've gotten some to leave.
Mm-hmm.
We're paying for that out of our taxpayer money to get more people to, and then we don't kill people.
Right. Yes, please. And then Mike.
I was wondering if you saw any evidence of use of solar electrical.
I didn't, but it's interesting that somebody brought that up last night at a presentation in Eugene. That same, the use of solar energy for electricity. You're the second person to mention that. I would guess that that would be something that somebody else told me there's only 5% of the population uses internet. And that just amazes me. In Iraq, I would like to check that out, because I know that under the occupation, when I was there, like 7, 8, 9 months into the occupation, there were internet cafes all over the place. But then the violence really soared, and that's something I'd like to check if I go back again, or even check with people that we know. That I don't know. That's.
Well, I guess I would think of an NGO as perhaps being an effective means
Yes. Yeah.
of channeling such an effort, but
Yeah, I know people we could ask about that, and you're the second person to bring that up. Thank you. Yes.
One of these things you see in Mexico, of how people heat hot water, is tanks up above on the buildings,
Right.
and it's certainly hot
Yeah.
as Iraq.
Yes, Mike.
You showed photos of and spoke of the young man at 6 who had lost all his limbs, and you said there was an effort to get him a single arm.
All right.
Is there a concrete program one can contribute to help with that?
I should actually take the time to rate what I've done so far that has just not panned out, any of the leads. We could even take that child to Jordan, I'll bet, and get an artificial limb for him, without having to bring him to the States, which would be much less expensive. And so I think in another trip, for some reason, the doctor, I don't know, is not responding to my emails. It might be that her written English is not like her spoken English, and for some reason she's not getting back to the doctors that I've been in touch with. So it just hasn't panned out, and it's such a simple thing in a way, to just get him a simple arm. We're not talking about an electrical arm. And I talked to somebody who did surgery at Walter Reed, a Navy man, and I showed him his picture at a 50th birthday party of his brother. I sort of took the picture thinking, I remember his brother used to. And I asked him if he'd sit down, and I showed him Mohammed's picture. And he said, ask USAID. And I said, well, that's like saying, write AT&T. I need a contact, And he never got me the contact. And so, those kinds of things. And Shriners Hospital, I had somebody in Massachusetts, Springfield, Massachusetts, a family that would put up Mohammed and his father while the boy was getting prostheses at Shriners. And I just got an email 2 days ago that Shriners, they're sorry, they have a policy now not to accept foreign children. So they didn't know if that was just their Shriners Hospital in Springfield, Massachusetts, but just so everything is sort of going up a blind alley,
Just on that subject, there's an organization called No More Victims.
That was the first person I got in touch with, Cole Miller.
Talked to Cole.
Yes, I did. Yes, back there.
So, I in that group where Bert was, I mentioned you know, that all these bombings, you know, remind me of the Quiet American, what the Americans did in Vietnam. And then Bert reminded me of those two British, you know, soldiers in Basra that were captured. And they were in Arab garb, and they had bombs with them. And then they were captured, and the British went in and they got them back, right? And I sort of wonder how far that went in Iraq, you know, if that information got out, or how aware Iraqis are that they might be playing this game, you know, of getting the Shias and Iraqis to fight each other so that they can, you know, divide and rule.
The Guardian had a story about Colonel Steele, who was involved in El Salvador in what was called the Salvadorian option. And it was the Guardian, right? Somebody, I'm pretty sure that's correct. If you put Colonel Steele in the Guardian,
Yeah, it was a Guardian.
search. And the point was, he was called into Baghdad. I don't remember the general who knew him, but the point of the article was, this is an investigative story, where he was bringing the torture, the disappearing, the assassination of different people as a means of tamping down resistance against the government. I think that was the gist of the story. And it was pretty awful. And there's one incident where one man, there's a video that goes along with it, where one man was a witness with this Colonel Steele walking somewhere in some police station. And Steele heard screaming from this room. And he opened the door to look and see who was inside. And it was a man hanging by his feet from a rope in the ceiling. And he'd been there, and that's one of the forms of torture, hanging people upside down for days. And this man was screaming, and Colonel Steele was nonchalant, just closed the door and walked away.
And
So-
finished his lunch.
And finished his lunch, exactly. So read the story, I think. It's the kind of stuff which is terrible that you won't find here. You won't find 500,000 dead Iraqi children from the sanctions from UNICEF in any of our major papers. It was never on the nightly news. If you want to know what's happening, you have to go to British newspapers or alternative sources.
Yeah,
Or this
that's
week,
true.
one last plug for Democracy Now! Every single day, it's been a remarkable story. And two people who will fill you in on a lot of details are Ray Gerard.
No, that's someone else,
No,
Dar
that's
Jamal.
somebody else. I'm also about to mention Dar Jamal from Qatar, speaking on Al Jazeera TV, and Ray Gerard, who's an Iraqi who grew up in Baghdad, who was an architect, whose mother is Sunni and father is Shia, or vice versa.
Interviewed this morning by Steve Scher.
I didn't hear that, but Democracy Now! Has a 13-minute interview.
Ryan Gerard was interviewed by Steve Scher this morning on KUOW.
The other name you're looking for is Negro Conti.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
He still worked in Central America. They did the same thing in Iraq.
Thank you.
Could I also mention that I've seen several articles about David Petraeus and querying whether the reason he was canned as from future positions had anything to do with marital infidelity as against things that were done relative to Steele in Iraq. You might keep an eye out for that.
Yes.
Cathy,
Rich.
I know you're not here as, you know, the expert
I'm
of
not
our
an
foreign
expert.
policy, but, you know, you've undoubtedly studied, you've certainly traveled, and you've seen the human consequences of our policies. I'd be interested in just getting your reflections on what is it that we're so obsessed about throughout the Middle East? Is it simply oil and greed? Or do you think that there is what's happened to us as a nation, that this is something that we're supporting with our tax dollars? And-
Oh, absolutely.
And it continues to expand? And
I think it was predicted, not widespread prediction, but before the invasion there were a couple people writing about this, that if we do go to war in Iraq, this is what's going to happen, and it all came true. So that there was, I think it's an agenda. You know, it's not just oil, it's power in the region, it's testing our weapons. You know, I mean, God knows what weapons we used. When we were there, when the regime toppled, and literally thousands of reporters streamed in from Jordan, just caravans of reporters. And they made their stories like Saddam Hussein's, or the mass graves, or they knew what stories they were supposed to go over. And I remember some of us talked to them and said, go to the airport. Go to the airport. We're hearing stories about chemical burns from inside, people. And they said, they won't let us go. And I said, well, make that your story. Make that your story. I mean, so I really do believe we tested our bombs and our chemical weapons, and there's just, I think it's so multifaceted. It's not an easy. I certainly have seen the consequences of war. I grieve all the time. I need anger management all the time. Listening to the radio, I don't watch TV, but when I listen to the radio, I sometimes just turn it off, and I'm sure we all do that. And, that might be healthy because we're reacting to something that is so convoluted that 2 and 2 doesn't equal 4 anymore. It hasn't for a long time, So what do we do in the face of that, right? I think violence begets violence, and goodness begets goodness. I have to believe that, that goodness also begets goodness. We see that. What do we do in the face of this? It used to be that we could shame our government into acting. For instance, in 2006, I think, it came out that we had only taken 436 Iraqi refugees into the country. And there was like an international outcry. And we were shamed into starting the U.S. resettlement program for Iraqis. But now shame doesn't work. Shame doesn't work. There is no shame anymore.